Chapter 6, we're going to deal with the roof, and this is 601, so wall plate and cut rafters. Now the wall plate, this thing here, not that one, this one, is already in. This is like the header stud, and then we've got the wall plate on top. And these can be strapped on, so you've got sort of anchor straps coming about 1.5 meters down this face, so that would hold it then into position. And then the rafters are going to sort of bird's beak their way over this. And again, you can strap those into place as well. We will be putting OSB on the underside and on the top side, so that should give us sufficient stiffness. Also, you can put lateral bracing in these things as well. So plenty of options to look at for sort of holding the roof on. Usually stopping the roof from blowing off is the bigger problem, rather than worrying about the load of the roof breaking or crushing the walls. It's nearly always anchoring the thing down is the hardest job. Okay, so with our wall plate already in place and our chapter 6 components loaded, so click on the details button, open or create local collection. You know the drill by now. Find the chapter 6 folder and then the chapter 6 components, load those up, and you will see at the top of the stack 11x2 timber rafter. So bring this in. We'll just drop it into place here. The insert point of that is at this sort of corner of the bird's beak. It's a 10-degree slope on this roof. So with the rotate tool, that's Q on the keyboard, click at that insert point, then come down to this point and then up to that point. Okay, so this should give us a 90-degree slot on that. Okay, so there you go. So that's now onto this thing. I haven't bothered strapping this down or showing any sort of straps for this coming down onto the timber frame. But again, check the local engineer's advice and you should be fine. So I just moved it along a little bit. I'm now going to copy it using the familiar method now, using the move tool, tap the control key or alt option on the Mac. And it's 405mm or 1'4" is the spacing. And then I'll go times 6, and that should give us enough to be getting on with. Okay, so we've got 405mm spacing on this, or 1'4" spacing. These are big lumps of wood, so 11x2, they're quite chunky, but it is quite a decent span. Now you could go for a different solution. You could go for engineered rafters or engineered joists, either the OSB version or the one with the sort of aluminium slanted spacer in the middle, and they usually go in at closer centers, but this chunky bit of wood should do us for now. Okay, so that's the cut rafters and the wall plate sorted out. We'll put the insulation in next, and then we can rattle through putting the roof on. Chapter 602, we're going to put the roof deck and insulation on now. So we've got a couple of layers of OSB to go down. One's going to go onto these rafters. That's going to sort of hold these things sort of in their position, add a bit of stiffness to it. And then we're going to put some insulation on, and then another layer of OSB on top of that. That's then going to allow us to add the shingles in the next lesson. Okay, so if we come down to OSB roof deck 1, pick that, and then just drop this into position. So that will go into this corner here. Now, we might as well slide this along a little bit on the green axis and line up with this edge. So finger on the shift key, lock it out, line it up with this edge so it pokes out just a little bit. So that's that bit done. Next up, we're going to go all the way back up to the roof insulation, 2-inch rigid insulation. So this is like a phenolic insulation or a PIR type insulation. So either of those work. Phenolic is the best, most insulating property for the insulation, but PIR a little bit cheaper and does a good enough job as well. Okay, so that can go on top. We've changed the orientation of this coming down this way. This board's sort of orientated the other way. It's usually a good idea to sort of orientate boards in different directions, so then you minimize the risk of any leaks. And then we can come back down to OSB roof deck 2 and drop that one in in this corner. Okay, so nice and quick and simple. That's the build-up of our roof. Next is going to come the membrane. And then on top of that, we're going to put the shingles. Now, they are already done, so it should take us no time at all to put those in as well. But that's just introducing you to the sort of levels and layers that build up these sort of typical built-up roofs. Chapter 603, we've got the membrane and the shingles to put on now. This is the waterproof element of the deck. Now, I could have easily added this to the other one, but I thought it would be useful to put this in separately. I've made all the pieces and arrayed the shingles, so it's not necessarily going to be a long process, but the waterproofing is going to be the most important part of this deck. We've got the insulation and the stiffness that's gone in with the boards. We obviously need things to fix too. We haven't got battens in this. This is a shingle roof, so not a cedar type shingle, but the asphalt shingle that is very popular in the States. So if we come down to the roof deck breather membrane, this is our sort of layer of Gore-Tex, as it were. This is going to be Tyvek, made by DuPont, who make Gore-Tex as well. So this is just going to be a thin little layer. This just gets wrapped over the roof. I think it's also called house wrap, that sort of stuff. And we'll just drop this into place here. So this is going to act as our breather membrane. So any water moisture that gets through the asphalt shingle, that's not going to be penetrating this, but water vapor will be able to come through this roof from the inside. Okay, so that's the way that these breather membranes work. And then if we go up to the A's for asphalt shingle array, and then we just drop this in, so pop it there, kind of line it up from this corner. So if we just put that onto the top there, and then that should be enough. It just sort of lifts up a little bit because we have got a few layers of this. But that should be fine for now. You can readjust if you want. But now we've got the shingles on the breather membrane on our OSB. So we need to fix this down to this. And manufacturers recommend sort of between 4 and 8 nails per these things. They often use those sort of compressed air guns to fire these things into place. Very important that you don't hit a point where the seam is, otherwise you may have to rip it out and start again. So you can't have a little hole under there. Every hole needs to be under one of these sort of flaps. Okay, and they are just thin bits of asphalt cut to shape. They're all marked up with various positions, and also the Tyvek will have lots of different lines on it so that you can line these things up as well. So that's that. We've got the OSB, the insulation, another layer of OSB, then more insulation underneath. We're going to have another layer of OSB under here, and then we have our vapor barrier, battens, and then our timber finish. Okay, so the whole process is going to be quite a few things. Like I say, it's never just one thing. It's always lots of different bits. Okay, so next up we're going outside to deal with this thing. This is the soffit, and I'll see you in the next exercise. Chapter 604, we're now going to fix the soffit. Okay, so there's a few bits and pieces we need to do here. We've got a soffit OSB. We're going to put a bit of OSB along there. We've got some battens to add to it. We've got a flashing trim along here, a drip flashing, and then we've got our boards which will run along there. Okay, so let's start off by finding the soffit OSB. That's this thing. So let's bring this in, and let's just drop this in place and line it up with that there. So that's our soffit OSB gone in. Soffit battens. So let's bring these in next. So these go in and come down. So this is not orientated, so we'll just have to position that at this point. And then with our rotate tool, click at this point, click there, and then drop that down. So our batten sitting there, we can fix our boards to that. And we're going to copy it to the other side. We're going to put 2 in down this side. So let's take it right down to that point, as close as we can get to this edge here. And then we'll copy another one just onto that position there. They look a bit messy, so let's just sort these out. So this one, just drop that back in. That should be fine. So these are sort of unwrought timber. They'll have a little crisscross on them in section when we start looking at the 2D details. But these basically are for carcassing and fixing. They're not finished. Then we are going to find our drip. So here we are, eaves drip flashing. So let's bring this in. So where this is going is down here somewhere. And the board's going to come against this edge here. So we're going to fit this bit under here. And it really is annoying when it won't line through. So we have to orientate ourselves around. But there you go. So this drip flashing we can probably take all the way to this edge. And drop that in, say at that point there. Okay, so something like that anyway. And what happens next is the boards, the external soffit boards, this thing here. These come in. These are squared up, so we need to rotate these around as well. So let's just drop them down. They're 10 degrees, so let's try using the move tool this time. Let's hover over one of these crosses, and let's just check that we're going in the right direction. Read the angle at the bottom right hand side of the screen. Enter 10, enter, and that should be fine. And then we can position these in place as well. So they're going to come in kind of here. So again, it's a question of moving it a couple of times and then moving it along the axis. So on the green axis, either there, or we can move it further along. Let's move it a bit further along, maybe to that point. And yeah, that's fine. Well, in fact, these battens should really line up with this edge. So let's just grab all of these bits and just move them all so they line up on the green axis with these bits here. Okay, so that should do it. So this is now what we've got. So these things are going to be secret fixed to this batten. Okay, maybe once, maybe twice, and certainly up here as well. The secret fixing process is that before this next one goes on, you fix through the tongue of the previous one, and then this one goes over the top of it, and you can't see the fixing. So it's called secret fixing because it's hidden. And that's basically that. What will happen once we've put the fascia on is that the boards inside will then look like they're running all the way through. Okay, so that was part of the detail in the original house. So we want to try to maintain that wherever possible. So that's what the client wanted, and that's what the client is going to get. Chapter 605, the fixing of the fascia and the sort of soffit or the fascia drip flashing along here. These two things are quick and easy. So we get a nice board of some shape or other. I think in this case, it's going to end up being sort of the galvanized aluminium. We'll get this clad, so it'll look really smart, nice and crisp lines. And we'll move up to this point, and we'll drop this in on the green axis to that sort of edge there. Now, there's no real point to take it all the way to the top, but you just leave it there. The flashing is going to come over and round this bit to sort this out. You could pack this, gunk it up, do anything you want with it. As long as we've got sufficient sort of overhang at this point and a nice little shadow gap, but notice it's not touching that very well. So we'll try and position it a little bit better. So I'm going to move it on the red axis and see if I can orbit round and then find that point there. This might be a case for using X-ray, but we have got an awful lot of extra lines to play with now. So if we can find that point, there you go. So turn off X-ray. So that's fixed back to the edges of the rafters. Okay, so we could possibly take it up. Obviously, this is going to be tucked in behind it, so it's not going to look like this in reality. We're going to cover over this in a second. but you could probably move this up a little bit. It's probably a bit too much of an overhang there. So on the blue axis, let's just take it up a touch so it lines through with the top there. So that would be the fascia. So all well and done with that. And now we are coming down to this thing, the fascia drip flashing. So let's just put this into position. And this is just going to come over the top of everything. Well sealed into position. So let's grab that internal point, fix it there, and then move it up a bit on the blue axis so it sits on top of that. So that's really the way these things are done. Ultimately, something will be covering something else. You always want your nicest looking thing to come out at the end. You see cases all over the place where people have just done a real botch job with some flash band or something. It's a temporary fix at best. Okay, so it's always better to pay attention to the details. This then would be well fixed to that. And there might be, several other things going on in there as well. It's a specialist job, making sure things are watertight. So again, employ people who know what they're doing and ask questions of people who know what they're doing as well. And before you know it, the knowledge just builds and builds and builds. Okay, so that's sorted this bit out. We probably tidy this up in a bit, and then we can look inside to finish off the internal ceiling. Chapter 606, we're now going to finish off the internal timber ceiling. A few bits and pieces to do. OSB board first, vapor barrier then, and battens on top of the vapor barrier, and then we finish off with our boards. I've juggled this trim a little bit. Okay, I've moved it, I've tucked it in a bit better than it was. I've also made some head trim for this. There might be a better way to resolve that, but it's good enough for the purposes of this. We get to understand how these things go together. That's the objective. So let's go down to the OSB, internal OSB roof sheathing. So that's going in there first. So let's just drop that maybe that point, and then we can pick it up from this corner and try to get it into position. Just sometimes it just does not want to go. So move it 2 or 3 times instead of 1. So that's the OSB. So now we come up to the ceiling vapor barrier. This one here. So pick that, and then we should just be able to snap that into this point here on that bottom corner. That shouldn't need any more treatment than that. Then we can come to the ceiling counter batten. That's the thing above it. So select that, and then let's just drop this in like so. Now we need to rotate this. So let's just drop that there and use the rotate tool, offer it up, click there, and then just come up to this point. So it should say 10 as the angle. If you look at the bottom right hand corner, we probably just want to move this down a touch to there. And then from this point, we'll copy it on this line up to round about there. Okay, so just in that sort of area, that'll be fine. Give you plenty of scope for fixing. Now, because I clicked, then I can't use the / function, so I'm just going to eyeball something or maybe hit the midpoint. That'll do. That's fine for that. And then we have got the timbers. Okay, so the ceiling timbers, they are internal ceiling timber board group. So I've grouped all these things together, save us having to put them in. And if we grab this top edge and move it up to that point there, and then just drop it down a bit where it fixes. So there. Then we've got a little shadow gap, or we've got something we might have to resolve this. So we could, potentially drop this down a bit, move this up a bit, have a little gap there. Probably better to have a little gap there. And then that could be painted black, or you can have a special piece in there. So you won't notice it ultimately. And then we'll have a nice little feature. The final bit is that window trim, window head trim. So let's just grab that and pop that in. So when you're coming close to this one, and then just get it up to that face as best we can. And then along on the green axis as best we can. And then across, oops, on the red axis as best we can. There you go, something like that. Slightly too long, so I'm going to double click, push pull this one down to this point. I could save that then back to my components by right clicking and save as, and save over, overwrite the existing. And then I'm just going to copy this one over to this point. Okay, so now we've got that window. The other thing we need to make sure that we do is make sure these planks line through inside to outside. Okay, so I'll leave you line those things up. The final bit is to put our self-leveling screed on and sort out this little bit here behind the door threshold. And then we've pretty much done. Okay, so not too bad. It didn't take us that long to build this thing. Hopefully you've appreciated that you can change this and do different things, resolve details differently, but it's all about the process for doing it. That's the important thing to grasp with this series. There is never one solution to any of this. There are lots and lots of different solutions, and it's the way in which you approach them. Chapter 607, the final one, we're just going to sort out the self-leveling screed and just trim up around this door threshold. This might have been missing, but I've put it in now. This is the internal render bead. So this should have been in. You'll find it on the completed version. It's also in the chapter 6 components. So just grab it and stick it in here. This is what we rendered down to, and what our self-leveling screed is going to go up against as well. So that's a piece that might have been missing. So we need the mesh first. So leveling screed mesh. If we come down to this one, this is about 4 inches, 100 mil. And effectively, this is just going to sit over the gap. Make sure it seals everything up so the self-leveling screed doesn't crack where you've got a bit of movement. So hopefully that will do the trick there. Then we are looking for the door threshold. So door threshold board, this thing here, we'll bring this in and we'll just move this this bottom corner to this bottom corner. That should fit right nicely. So again, these things don't go all the way to the back. This will be a nice snug fit. Mesh up to it. And obviously the mesh is going to go all the way along, as will this. And then we have the leveling screed. So I've also had to do a little bit of juggling with some of these bits just to get it all to work properly. I did suggest earlier on that that might be the case when we get right down to this bit. And the final bit is the self-leveling screed. So this thing here. So you just drop this in. And if we are lucky and the wind is behind us, then this thing will come in to this point here. So that's tight against that. And then it should come in here. Okay, we just have to move it out a little bit. Something like that. Okay, so that will flow around that there. And that is pretty much it. Okay, so we've gone from foundations, external wall, internal finishes, door, window, cladding, roof, insulation, vapor barriers, moisture barriers, everything you'd probably need to know about how this thing goes together. There'll be a couple of bits and pieces that won't be quite right, but if you didn't know anything about how these things went together, then hopefully by now you've got an idea that there's an awful lot of things make up this sort of stuff. Okay, that's why so many people work in the construction industry. These days, people are developing the sort of off-site manufacture of everything a lot more than they ever used to. So it's coming in kit form and being erected on site. So that means that precision has to be much greater than ever before. Okay, so 3D details are great for explaining how things go together, but we still do tend to work off 2D drawings. So we'll be looking next at how we can quite easily take this information from SketchUp into layout.